I was sitting under the maple tree my late wife planted, the one no one waters but still stands. That morning, I found a court letter. My daughter Violet is suing me for the house I built with my bare hands. She says I'm too old to know what's mine. Funny. She doesn't know I recorded everything, every forgery, every lie, stored with my war buddy, who also happens to be my lawyer. And there's one more thing she forgot. That tree. It's legally protected by a clause she signed when she was 19. I smiled as I poured coffee. The storm's coming, but this time I've already built the shelter. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from. I want to know how far my roots have grown. The gate felt colder than I remembered. It wasn't just the rust under my fingers, it was the emptiness, the kind that sneaks in when a place forgets you. There used to be a nameplate here that read Nesdale, brass, polished every month like a family heirloom. Now it said D.V. Carmichael, scripted, metallic, pretentious. They didn't even keep the trees. My late wife planted those dogwoods in '82, one for each of our kids. Gone now. In their place were manicured hedges and uplighting that made the house look like a catalog photo. It looked expensive. It was. I lingered longer than I should have, brushing my thumb across the gate's hinge, still slightly crooked from when I installed it myself years ago. Violet must have forgotten, or maybe she never noticed. Music drifted out from the backyard. Laughter. Glasses clinking. I could smell grilled shrimp and some kind of herb I never cooked with. Rosemary, maybe. The party was in full swing. Her housewarming, they said. My daughter starting a new chapter. In my house. I adjusted my belt, took a breath that didn't go as deep as I wanted, and pushed the gate open. The backyard was full. Dozens of people, some in polo shirts, others in linen blazers and big sunglasses, stood chatting near high tables. No one noticed me at first. I moved slowly, hoping to blend in, but knowing full well I didn't belong in a crowd like this anymore. Someone passed me, holding a tray of mini quiches. I caught a glimpse of the kitchen through the sliding doors. Violet stood at the island, laughing at something Dimitri said. Her hand was on his chest. There was a photo table near the fountain. I walked to it instinctively, like a moth to the flame. The centerpiece was a framed picture of Dimitri and Violet, arms around each other, standing on the front porch of the house. My house. They looked happy, youthful, secure. I scanned the rest. Wedding pictures. One of Violet as a baby. And a few modern shots. Skiing in Tahoe. Cocktails in Charleston. No picture of my wife. No picture of me. A woman in a peach dress glanced my way. Her brow furrowed for a second, then smoothed. She smiled politely and turned back to her conversation. Another man glanced down at my shoes, work boots, worn and scuffed. I should have polished them, or not come at all. Can I help you? I knew that voice too well. Dimitri's tone always carried the subtle arrogance of a man who thought charm was enough. He was already smiling as he approached, flanked by two guests holding cocktails. "Sir," he said loudly, like he wanted others to hear, "are you lost?" I didn't answer. He stepped closer. "You're not on the list. This is a private gathering." A few more guests turned. Some leaned in subtly. I saw a phone come up. Someone pretending to check a text. Camera conveniently pointed our way. Dimitri gestured to security. "Would you mind helping this gentleman find his way out?" He said, "Gentleman," like it tasted sour. The guard came over, polite but firm. I didn't make a scene, didn't raise my voice. I just looked at Violet, who had seen everything from the patio. She turned away. That stung more than words ever could. The driveway was longer than I remembered. The music and laughter faded as I walked back out, but it somehow felt louder behind me, like the house wanted to make sure I knew I didn't belong. As I passed the east wall, something caught my eye, a faint carving on the old stone, the initials AN, with the date 1974 below it. I remembered carving it while the mortar was still drying. My mark, a promise. No one else noticed it. They never did. The truck door creaked when I opened it. I slid into the driver's seat and just sat there for a while, watching the house through the windshield. The lights sparkled. The laughter continued. I reached for the glove box, hand trembling, not from age, but something deeper. Inside was a manila envelope, thick, yellowed with time. Deed, Nesdale Estate, it read, and it had my name on it. From the cab of my old truck, I could still see the lights flickering from Violet's house. Even behind the thick hedges and the parked cars, the glow spilled onto the street like it had something to prove. The laughter, though muffled, found its way through my cracked window. I stayed there, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. I wasn't ready to leave, not yet. I used to know those faces, the same ones now toasting inside, dancing, eating my food off new plates in a house I once built nail by nail. Now they looked different, smoother, shinier, and distant. The same way a painting feels familiar until you realize it's a replica, not the real thing. A red balloon floated skyward from the backyard, cut loose or let go, I couldn't tell. It bobbed and snagged in the limbs of the old pecan tree near the side gate. I watched it shudder in the breeze, trapped, just like how I felt. Visible, but not welcome. The gift. My heart skipped. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the small velvet box. Inside was the locket, silver, a bit tarnished, but polished carefully just yesterday. Clara's initials were still engraved on the back. It used to be hers, now meant for Celeste. A little something to anchor her to the family, even if the rest of them drifted. I had tucked it in a pink envelope with her name in cursive, a note folded inside. From the one who built the steps you now climb. It wasn't poetry, but it was honest. I'd left it at the gift table earlier that day when no one was watching. Now, a sour pull in my gut told me to check. I walked, slowly and deliberately, back toward the side of the house. Around the bushes, past the back fence, an old route my feet still remembered. The bins were lined up near the alley. I stopped and stared for a moment, unsure of what would hurt more, not finding it or finding it exactly where I feared. There it was. Crushed between an empty soda can and a torn napkin. The box was open, ribbon limp and dangling. The locket still inside. The note, unread, untouched. No fingerprints. Just discarded. Not even stolen. That would have meant someone saw value in it. A sound behind me made me turn. Heavy steps on gravel. The security guard. Not the same one from before. Bigger. Less polite. "Sir," he said, hand on his hip like he had something more than a walkie-talkie there. "You're making guests uncomfortable." I looked at him. Not angry, not defiant, just tired. "Am I?" I asked. He didn't answer, just pointed toward the street. I picked up the locket, wiped it clean with my shirt sleeve, and pocketed it. As I walked back down the gravel path, I caught sight of Dimitri. He was standing on the upstairs balcony, one hand resting casually on the rail, the other swirling a drink. He raised his glass in a mock toast. Our eyes met. He smiled. Not the kind of smile you share between family. The guard opened the gate for me, a mechanical gesture. I stepped through without a word. The gate clicked shut behind me. My boots scuffed the sidewalk as I walked, slower this time. Back in the truck, I let the silence stretch. No music, no engine, just the sound of wind through the trees and a few crickets brave enough to sing. I looked up at the sun visor. Still taped there, curling at the edges, was a baby photo of Violet. One of the last pictures Clara ever took. She had a bow in her hair and mashed peas on her chin. We used to laugh about that. Now, the silence between us had become something else. Not an argument, not a misunderstanding, something colder, like a wall had been built, brick by brick, out of choices and silences and moments neither of us had fixed. I glanced down at the envelope again, the one marked Deed, Nesdale Estate, still unopened. It wasn't time, not yet. Instead, I reached for the phone mounted on the dash and hit the first number on speed dial. It rang twice before a voice answered. "Arnold?" "Roland," I said, voice steady. "Can you meet me at the fence line tomorrow morning?" A pause. "That fence still standing?" "Not for long," I replied. "There's something I need to see, and something I need you to remember." The morning light spilled over the fields like it used to, before the fences were taller and the laughter inside had new names. I stood at the edge of what once was mine, boots planted in the dew-wet grass, fingers resting on the old fence post. I sank into the earth with my father in 1982. The wood was worn smooth by time, but it still held firm, unlike everything else. Roland pulled up without a word, his pickup grumbling like an old smoker. He stepped out, adjusted his cap, and joined me at the line. We didn't hug. Men our age don't do that often. Instead, he scanned the house, the grounds, then looked me square in the face and nodded. "They changed the grade of the yard," he said after a long pause. "Didn't even ask the water board." "Wasn't their place to change?" I murmured. He placed a weathered hand on my shoulder. That touch said more than any apology ever could. After a while, Roland reached into his coat and handed me his phone. "You need to see this." It was a video, no more than 30 seconds, taken by some party guest. There I was, standing near the buffet, a shadow among sequins and wine glasses. Dimitri's voice rang out. Too loud, too clear. "Is this guy with the catering staff?" Laughter. Then the hand gesture to security. The crowd parting like the Red Sea. I could hear my own footsteps retreating. In the corner of the screen, my daughter, Violet, frozen. Her face stiff, arms folded, and when I turned toward her, even just for a second, she looked away. Not with shock, not with fear. With decision. I thought maybe she didn't see, I said, handing the phone back. Roland didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She didn't flinch, I continued. That's what gets me. She just let it happen. She used to cling to your leg when you dropped her at school, Roland added gently, would cry for half an hour. That was a lifetime ago, I said, though it tasted bitter in my mouth. The fog was lifting by then, both outside and inside. I reached into my coat and pulled out a manila envelope, thicker now than before. I handed Roland a copy of the deed. They can dress the house in new paint, move the mailbox, hell, change the doorknobs. But the bones are mine, I said. He thumbed through the document, eyes narrowing. This is airtight, Arnold, but you're not just here for paperwork. No, I said. I'm here for what's right, for history. For the promises made when they were too young to remember. Roland sighed, slipping the paper back into its folder. I'll talk to Darlene over at the clerk's office. She still owes me a favor. And the others. I'll make calls, quietly. We stood for a moment longer. I looked at the post again. Initials carved, faint but present. Proof that I had built more than walls here. I had built a life. Later, after Roland left, I stayed behind, watching the world go by from the same patch of grass. A group of joggers passed by, not giving me so much as a glance. I sat on the tailgate of my truck and opened my phone's camera. Not to post, not to accuse, just to speak. This is for Celeste, I said, keeping my voice steady. One day, maybe you'll want to know why your grandfather left, and why he came back. The video saved. I didn't watch it again. Back home, the mailbox was ajar. Inside, a single envelope, no stamp. The handwriting was unfamiliar, looping, careful. I opened it. Not everyone agrees with Dimitri. You're not forgotten. It was unsigned, but there was a faint smudge of lipstick on the corner. I sat down on the porch, paper in hand, and let the silence settle around me. Something was shifting, quietly but undeniably. The world wasn't done with me yet. The chair creaked beneath me, its wood worn smooth by years of weather and memory. I had built it with my own hands, long before Dimitri ever stepped foot on this land. It sat under the oak tree in the backyard, the one Violet used to climb when she was small. Now, the tree seemed taller, older, like me. I brought my own thermos, poured a cup of lukewarm tea, and waited. Inside, I saw shadows move, curtains shifted. Someone whispered. I didn't care. I wasn't here to argue or make a scene. I just wanted her to come out and look me in the eyes. For once. The screen door creaked open. Violet stepped onto the porch, hesitant. Her arms were crossed, her jaw tight. I didn't stand, just gestured to the chair beside me with the same calm I used to have when she skinned her knee and came running home. She sat. Silence stretched between us like a fault line. Then I asked, "Was it fear, Violet, or something worse? Indifference?" She looked away, always away. I waited. "I didn't know what to say," she whispered. "Everything happened so fast." "That's not true," I cut in softly. "It didn't happen fast. It built over time, and you let it." Her fingers twisted in her lap. Her voice cracked. "He said, you didn't want to be part of it anymore. I let that sit there, the lie, the convenience of it, and the cowardice it took to believe it." Before she could say more, Dmitri emerged like a storm in tailored linen. He walked straight to us, holding a folder like a sword. "Arnold," he said in a low, measured voice, "we need to speak, privately." I didn't flinch. Just stood and followed him to the edge of the lawn, where the grass gave way to gravel. He handed me a printed notice: trespassing, harassment, legal threat wrapped in formal language, and fake concern. "You're disrupting the family," he said. "This can't continue." "Funny," I replied, folding the paper neatly. "I thought that's exactly what you wanted. Disruption, distance." He leaned in. "You don't want this to go to court." I pulled the original deed from my coat pocket and held it between us. "You may own the party, son, but I built the foundation." His eyes flickered. "No threats, no drama," I said. "But if you push me out of something I gave everything to build, I'll push back." I didn't wait for a response. Walking back, I saw guests now watching through the windows. A few had stepped onto the porch. Roland appeared from the far end of the yard, his walk casual, but his eyes sharp. He sat beside me without a word. The silence between us said enough. Violet hadn't moved. She stood by the door, staring down at her hands. Torn. My phone buzzed in my coat. A text from an unknown number. "There are others. You're not fighting alone." The message was short, but something in it made my breath catch. Hope, maybe. Or the stirrings of something harder to kill. I slipped the phone away and took another sip of tea, letting the quiet wrap around me like armor. She was still watching. That was enough for now. The email came at 2:17 p.m. Sharp. I was halfway through sanding down a splintered porch rail when my phone buzzed twice in my back pocket. Benedict West, attorneys at law. I almost didn't open it. Figured it might just be more spam or some belated newsletter. But the subject line stopped me. Nesdale Estate. Legal title status and immediate action. I wiped my hands on a rag, heart pacing like it hadn't in years. Inside the message, all the formalities were there. My full name, parcel number, deed references, municipal permit numbers. But one sentence stood out like a thunderclap in a silent room. Our review confirms Mr. Arnold Nesdale remains the sole legal owner of the property currently known as the Nesdale Estate. Just like that, a small gust of wind knocked over the sanding block beside me. Or maybe my knees did. The message continued. Dimitri's permit applications had used misrepresented information. The firm was now filing to reclaim my access and property rights. I leaned against the workbench, breathing in sawdust and something else. Something like air after a long drought. I didn't reply. I didn't forward it. I just sat for a long time, rereading it, feeling a kind of justice arrive without sirens or shouting. Just text on a screen. The modern sword. Later that evening, I heard gravel crunching in the driveway. It wasn't a car engine I recognized, not Violet's hatchback or Roland's beat-up Ford. I stepped outside and saw Dmitri, alone, climbing out of a silver sedan, hair unkempt and shirt wrinkled. He looked like a man who hadn't slept. "I got your lawyer's email," he said, hands half raised, as if approaching a wild animal. I said nothing. He walked toward me, not with arrogance this time, but with desperation. "Look, Arnold, Mr. Nesdale, we didn't mean for it to go this far. Violet didn't want to fight. She was scared. We were building a life." I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Fear doesn't forge signatures." He blinked. "What?" "Fear doesn't file fake permits. Greed does." He swallowed, cheeks twitching. It wasn't like that. I raised a hand, and he stopped mid-sentence. I've had decades of silence, Dmitri. I know what manipulation looks like when it dresses up as apology. He glanced around as if hoping Violet would come running with backup. But she stayed in the car. I don't want to fight, he tried again, voice thinner now. I don't want this to ruin us. It already did. He turned then, without another word, and walked back to the car. I saw her then. Violet. She was in the passenger seat, hands in her lap. She didn't look at me, not once. But as Dmitri opened the door, her face caught the side mirror just right, and I saw something there. An expression twisted in thought, in guilt, maybe. Or maybe it was nothing. It was hard to tell through reflections. They drove off without a sound. That night, Roland came by with a thermos of coffee and a notepad. We sat under the low porch light, its glow barely reaching our hands as we wrote out the first few lines of a sworn affidavit. I'm not trying to burn it all down, I told him. He nodded. Just trying to keep what's already yours. For Celeste, I added quietly. For whoever tells the story next, he smiled, one of those half-smiles that understood more than words. We worked in silence. Just before midnight, I found an envelope pushed under the door. No return address. Inside was a single note, scrawled on lined paper. She's starting to remember, but it hurts. There was no signature, just a small smudge of lipstick on the corner. I folded the paper, slipped it into my journal, and turned off the light. The clerk looked up, startled, as we stepped through the heavy doors of the Asheville Public Records Office. The air smelled like old ink and laminate, the kind of sterile that masked years of dust and bureaucratic neglect. Roland nodded politely and explained what we were looking for. Original property transfer filings and permits tied to the Nesdale estate. I didn't need to speak. My presence said enough. An aging man with eyes fixed on something long buried. The clerk hesitated, tapping at the keyboard before disappearing into the back. Roland whispered, "This place hasn't changed since '95. Neither had Betrayal, apparently. We were handed a stack of paper copies, more than 2 decades of renovations and permit approvals, many of which I never authorized. I began sifting through the records, my finger trailing each printed date and signature. One caught my eye, a 2021 document claiming I'd approved a full interior remodel. Except, in 2021, I was in the hospital with a broken wrist. I couldn't even hold a fork. Roland scanned it too. That's not your handwriting, Arnold. Look, no hesitation, no tremble. I nodded, and the hospital logged my cast that week. That page, now creased in my grip, would be the beginning of everything shifting. Back at their house, Celeste climbed into the attic with the stealth only teenagers can manage. Violet and Dmitri were out, probably meeting with lawyers or fretting over PR. But she wasn't interested in them. Something about last night, the tension, the glances, it stuck with her. She found a small box tucked beneath layers of blankets. On top was her name, scribbled in familiar, looping cursive. For Celeste, someday. Her fingers trembled as she turned the tiny key. Inside, an envelope yellowed at the edges and a delicate silver locket, the same one I had tried to give her, tossed aside like trash. But now, in this light, it shimmered like something sacred. She unfolded the letter slowly. "Dearest Celeste," it began, "you may not know me, but I loved you before you were born. I loved you in every story your grandfather told me about the day you took your first steps." The words swam in front of her. Her grandmother's voice, kind, certain, unwavering, told of a family built on sacrifice and trust. Not ownership, not manipulation, just love. She pressed the locket to her chest and cried. I had just gotten home when my phone buzzed. "Grandpa, can I ask you something about Grandma's letter?" It was the first message I'd received from Celeste in weeks. I sat down on the porch, staring out at the field I once mowed with a push blade and pride. I typed back, "Of course, sweetheart, I'd like that." It was a small crack in the wall, but light was coming through. Dusk fell. The sun cast long shadows across the porch when Violet stormed up the steps, clutching the attic box. Her voice trembled more than her hands. "Did you plant this?" I didn't get up. I looked her in the eye, the same eyes I used to soothe after nightmares. "No, Violet," I said softly, "but I'm glad she found it." She didn't reply. Just stood there, her face torn between doubt and something deeper. Memory, maybe. Later that night, I returned to the documents. I laid them out in rows, matching signatures, dates, hospital records. The story was coming together, piece by painful piece. A knock interrupted me. There, beneath my doorframe, was another envelope. No return address, no handwriting I recognized. Inside, a simple note. "She's starting to remember, but it hurts." A smudge of ink, or lipstick. I couldn't tell. I folded it gently, slid it into my journal, and turned off the light. The invitation came a week after the confrontation. Or perhaps I accepted it out of habit. Family dinners used to mean something. Now it felt like stepping into a brittle smile. The table was set on the back patio under old string lights, white cloth over the wood. Violet greeted me at the gate, her tone clipped, her eyes unsettled. The neighbors watched. My heart settled in that familiar ache. We sat. The air smelled of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes made by someone trying too hard. Conversations tried to stay light, weather, the kids, the remodel, salt and pepper. But every glance toward me was heavy. Then Celeste stood. Her chair scraped back too loudly. Heads turned. She held the worn letter in trembling hands. I sat, heart hammering, as she cleared her throat and read aloud, her voice soft but unwavering. "You told me family meant loyalty, but I think you meant obedience." Every face stiffened. Violet's glass of water trembled in her hand. Dimitri stared, chalk-faced. Guests shifted their weight, unsure which side would break. Then Roland rose slowly, pulling from his jacket a printout. A bank receipt, transfer from Violet's account to a shadowy firm, dated just before permit submissions. It slammed on the table. Plates rattled. Silence settled. Violet's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Dimitri lowered his gaze. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Dimitri cleared his throat and raised a glass. "To family unity." It rang hollow. My hands found rest on the edge of the table. "If unity comes at the price of lies," I said, voice low but steady, "then I'll toast to silence." I stood, lifted my napkin, left the plate half-eaten. No anger, just finality. Violet bolted. Dimitri rushed after her. Celeste sat frozen, tears glistening. Roland quietly put out his chair and stood beside me. Down the driveway I walked, guests watching from windows and steps, but no stop. In the car, my flip phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered. "You don't know me, Mr. Nesdale, but I know what Violet did with the land, and I have the footage." I closed my eyes. The road ahead dark and still filled with strangers, but the truth now had allies. The cafe was quiet, save for the faint clinking of dishes behind the counter and the occasional huff of the espresso machine. I sat near the window with a lukewarm cup of black coffee, my phone in hand, screen glowing brighter than the daylight outside. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. The video had gone viral. A clip, barely a minute long, but enough to spark a fire. Dimitri's voice crackled over the footage as he motioned for security to remove me from what was once my own front yard. Guests froze, phones in hand. The title above the video read, "This is how they treat their father-in-law?" Hashtags swarmed the screen. #respect, the Nesdales, #elder justice, #family doesn't evict. Comments piled in faster than I could read. Some were angry, others were stunned. A few simply asked, "Who is Arnold Nesdale?" I didn't expect this. I hadn't asked for it, but the ache that had been in my chest for weeks, it eased. By late afternoon, my name had appeared in headlines. Local outlets, then state blogs, even a national column or two. Elderly man sues for home he built. Daughter's husband, accused of fraud. Words that once felt shameful now stared back from the screen like allies. At the bottom of one article was a quote from the public court filing. The one Roland helped me finalize. It was real. The law was moving. And for once, it was moving on my side. I didn't smile, but I did breathe easier. Back at the Nesdale house, or rather what had become Dimitri's kingdom, the news had found its way through. Violet sat stiff on the couch, her hands wrapped tight around a mug. The television blared the very headlines I'd just read. Dimitri stood behind her, arms crossed, jaw set. Her phone rang, then rang again. She didn't answer. They were trapped now, not by me, not by the law, but by the very silence they'd relied on. That silence was crumbling. Later that evening, Roland called. "We've got more," he said. A neighbor from 2 blocks over had footage, not just of the party, but of Dimitri signing off on property permits under a shell company's name. The timestamps aligned too well. It wasn't just betrayal, it was orchestrated theft. "Meet me tomorrow morning," I told him. "We'll prep affidavits." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Roland understood. By dawn, I was back on my porch. The sky stretched out in soft pinks and faded golds. Across the yard, Celeste danced barefoot on the dew-covered grass, chasing her own shadow with laughter that cracked the quiet. She didn't see me watching, or maybe she did, and pretended not to. Either way, the pain in my chest didn't return. Instead, something warm, something whole settled there. I had lived long enough to know that truth rarely arrives with a trumpet. It comes in moments like this, quiet, steady, stubborn. My phone buzzed again. A text. Unknown number. "Mr. Nesdale, I'm a local reporter following the story. Would you be willing to talk? The public deserves to hear your voice." I stared at the message, looked up at Celeste. She waved, unsure, but smiling. I typed back. Yes. The courtroom felt colder than it should have been, not from the air, but from the silence, the kind that wraps itself around a room when something deeply human is at stake. I sat near the front, flanked by empty seats on either side. The gallery behind me was filled with curious neighbors, murmuring strangers, and reporters who smelled a headline like blood in the water. Across the room, Dimitri sat in a navy blue suit that looked too crisp for a man unraveling. His lawyer whispered in his ear, but he barely nodded. He avoided looking at me. Maybe because he finally saw me, not as the old man he could outmaneuver, but as the one who outlasted him. Violet's seat was empty. I kept glancing at the door, hoping, or maybe just testing my own disappointment, measuring how deep it ran now that the hurt had dried. When Roland took the stand, his voice was as steady as the hand that once built this town's fences, homes, and barns. He walked the court through every forged document, every shell company, every email that linked Dimitri to a quiet deception wrapped in legal paper. The judge, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a wedding ring worn down by decades, listened intently. When Roland played the video, the one from the neighbor's hidden camera, it showed Dimitri signing paperwork under an alias just weeks before the property approval hearing. There was no room left for interpretation. Then they called me. I stood, walked slowly to the front, and sat in the witness chair. No dramatics, no speeches, just memory. I built that house with my wife. Every nail, every window frame, every patch of garden, we did it together. We raised our daughter there, buried our dog in the backyard, hosted Christmases, mourned loss, celebrated life. That house wasn't a building. It was the only thing that stayed with me after everything else went. I didn't speak to tear anyone down. I spoke to remind the room that stories have weight, that when they're rewritten without the people who lived them, something sacred is lost. When I returned to my seat, the judge folded her hands and leaned forward. This court finds that Mr. Arnold Nesdale retains co-ownership rights to the property at 42 Nestled Pines Road. The attempted transfer was conducted under fraudulent terms. The deed will be corrected to reflect his legal status, and all pending development activities are hereby suspended. Dimitri exhaled loudly. Or maybe it was a groan. His lawyer stood frozen. I sat still. A part of me wanted to cry, not from joy, not from relief, but from the sheer weight of having been heard. Outside, the sun greeted us like it had been waiting for years. Reporters swarmed, their questions bouncing off each other. "Mr. Nesdale, what will you do with the house? Do you plan to press further charges?" I simply nodded, eyes scanning the crowd. Then I saw her, Celeste, breaking through the legs and elbows of adults. She ran straight to me, arms wide. I bent, knees creaking, and lifted her off the ground. Her arms tightened around my neck, and I felt something thaw inside. She whispered, "Grandma would be proud." I didn't answer, just held her closer. Later that afternoon, I returned home. The old house, my house, stood quiet. The wind stirred the branches out front. Roland arrived not long after, carrying a small box. We didn't speak much, just worked together to reattach the old nameplate to the porch post. Nesdale Home, 1963. The wood was weathered, but the letters still held firm. We sat side by side on the porch. The creak of the swing, the buzz of cicadas, the smell of late summer air, it all came back like an old song that never really left. We didn't toast, didn't celebrate. We just existed in the space we had fought to reclaim. I thought about Violet, where she might be, whether she'd ever speak again. But for now, it was enough to breathe without burden. The front door creaked in a way I hadn't heard in years, like it was remembering, but unsure. I pushed it open slowly, stepping into a silence that felt heavier than any courtroom hush. The judge had ruled in my favor just hours ago, yet the house felt altered. The walls, the floors, the hush, they'd absorbed something that neither legal victory nor news headlines could change. I wandered through rooms that once echoed with small footsteps and laughter. I paused in the hallway where Violet had placed her wedding photo. Now it stood alone, its frame tilted. I didn't straighten it. I only carried myself forward into the bedroom, where a small cardboard box waited silently on the bed. Inside, childish drawings, Celeste's sketches of our family, all stick figures in sunny hills, labeled proudly, Grandpa's house. Underneath lay a court summons to Violet, dated weeks before the hearing. She never showed it to me. Holding those drawings felt like memory and betrayal squeezing together in my chest. The walls had heard everything. The solitude didn't comfort me. It reminded me that trust had crumbled even as truth triumphed. I drafted a call several times, my finger hovering over her number. Finally, I picked up the phone and spoke, but I said nothing to her directly. Instead, I hit record and whispered into voicemail. "You don't hide things like this unless you mean to hurt." Then erased it. I wasn't ready for confrontation, not yet. Later, as dusk settled, Roland arrived carrying a battered toolbox. He set to work fixing loose boards on the porch railing, as if retracing every carved date we'd placed there. Finally, I asked softly, "Why did you come back?" His saw paused mid-cut. Because they were wrong, and someone needed to say it. I realized then how long he'd watched, how quietly he'd stayed by my side. No fanfare, no speech, just a presence steady enough to believe alongside me. We didn't speak much afterward. We cleaned tools, tightened screws, and let the evening air settle between us. When the final nail hit wood, it felt like a marker. This home would breathe again, on our terms. Later that night, the lights remained off. I held the old Nesdale Home 1963 nameplate in my hands, tracing each carved letter. Outside, the branches of the old maple tree whispered in the wind. I looked through the window, watching the horizon darken. I murmured softly, as if listing the invisible ledger of loss and redemption. I won the house, but what did I lose to keep it? No answer came. But for the first time in a long time, the stillness felt honest. The envelope was heavier than I expected. Roland handed it to me in silence, but his eyes said more than any words ever could. A wax seal still pressed firm against the flap. My own initials. A will I'd filed decades ago and forgotten like a memory too painful to revisit. Until now. "Everyone's been notified," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, noon, Benedict West." I nodded. My hands didn't tremble, but something beneath them did. The office smelled of cedar and ink. Old-world dignity trying to mask the tension thick in the air. Violet sat with her arms crossed, lips tight. Kevin scrolled his phone, pretending indifference. Celeste clutched her grandmother's locket like a prayer. Roland stood in the corner, still and steady, a silent metronome to keep time. Mr. Eldridge, my attorney for over 30 years, adjusted his glasses. This supplemental will is dated 1995. It was updated with a voice addendum 2 months ago. He pressed play. My voice filled the room, not the voice they knew, but the version that still stood tall, unshaken by betrayal. I once believed legacy was passed down through love alone, but time taught me it must be earned and protected. I spoke of long nights building the house with bare hands, of holding Violet's feverish head to my chest, of watching my grandson walk away from the land without knowing what he stepped on. I spoke of my wife, how her name faded from the mantelpiece, replaced by LED lights and champagne flutes. But when the bloodline breaks trust, the burden of remembrance must fall elsewhere. I had transferred the deed and estate into a confidential family trust 30 years prior, a clause activated only if my direct heirs acted in contradiction to the founding values, documented integrity, proven stewardship. The room fell still. Effective immediately, Eldridge read. Mr. Roland Matthews and Miss Celeste Nesdale are co-stewards of the Nesdale Trust. Violet Nesdale is hereby excluded from all future ownership or administrative rights pertaining to the property. Kevin looked up, his face pale. Kevin's portion of the remaining estate, the attorney continued, is limited to a one-time educational disbursement. Celeste blinked rapidly. Celeste's stewardship is conditional. She must reside within the estate alongside Mr. Arnold Nesdale for no less than 1 calendar year, during which she is to engage in historical documentation and intergenerational preservation efforts. My voice concluded, if legacy is to mean anything, it must be lived, not looted. The air outside was different, raw, exposed. Violet was first to speak, spitting venom through tears. You planned this. You orchestrated this entire spectacle just to humiliate me. I didn't answer. Kevin shoved past Roland without a word. A gust of wind caught the door behind him, slamming it shut like punctuation. Celeste stood frozen by the steps, tears streaking her cheeks. "Why me?" she whispered. Roland placed a hand on her shoulder. "Because you listened." And then to me, "It's finally yours, Dad. The home, the meaning, all of it." That night, I sat by the window with the tape recorder still in my lap. My voice echoed back faintly. I didn't hit rewind. In the yard, Celeste watered the old sycamore. Her movements were gentle, reverent. The same tree her grandmother had planted when Violet was born. Its roots had survived drought, wind, betrayal. Legacy, I whispered, isn't what you leave behind. It's who still stands beside you. The porch light flickered once and then stayed on. A cold breeze stirred the golden maple leaves outside, and I stood on the front porch watching them drift to the ground. It was autumn again, the same season Clara always favored. The tree she planted stood tall, its branches shaking off time bit by bit. Celeste was still here, but everything else felt quieter. The house held fewer secrets now, though the absence of voices still echoed. Inside, Celeste and I had spent the morning dusting off the attic room she'd now claimed in name and spirit. We sorted old photographs, hospital blankets, and boxes creaking with memory. She found a faded photo of Clara on the porch swing. I wrapped the quilt around her shoulders and said softly, "She loved this place too." I guided her hand across a frame with her grandparents' wedding photo. "We let go of what got us here," I explained gently, "so we can heal here." Later, a lawyer's car arrived down the drive. I recognized the envelope before the knock, certified mail. Violet was suing over the Nesdale Trust, claiming I'd lost my mind, influenced by Roland and Celeste. I placed the paper on the kitchen table. It felt heavy, toxic. Celeste's face paled. She chewed her lip. But I stood by the window, calm as dusk settled. This was always going to happen, I whispered, more to the house than to her. That evening, Roland joined us again, this time carrying my old tape recorder. I cleared the tapes, one confidential copy protected with my lawyer and therapist, revealing the second recording. Every deceit, every forgery, every quiet betrayal laid bare. If Violet fires this lawsuit, this tape goes public, I told both of them. Roland's eyes flickered with pride. Celeste pressed my hand gently. The moment felt electric, charged with reckoning. I never raised my voice, never threatened, but the quiet weight of truth had shifted the entire foundation. Night deepened. I sat alone beneath the maple tree, the locket clasped around my neck, its chain catching the last light of dusk. Celeste was inside making soup. Roland's son ran across the lawn chasing the last leaf of the season. The house breathed in soft creaks and distant memories. In the soft glow of the porch light, I whispered, "They can take what's written on paper, but they can't rewrite who I am." I closed my eyes and let the wind carry the weight of what was lost and what remained. A house stands by its walls, but a home stands by its stories. I spent years reclaiming bricks and land. Now I reclaim memory and meaning. That, at the end, is the legacy worth holding.